Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today we are going to discuss Part 4 of Aristotle and Poetics. We had already covered 3 video lectures in Part 1, Part 2 and Part 3. Now, these 3 video lectures included a detailed introduction to Greek theatre, a biography of Aristotle, along with the summary and explanation of chapters 1 to 15. So, here we go with chapter 16. Now, before we start with chapter 16, a few points to remind you of the previous chapters. So as discussed earlier, Aristotle is using a digressive pattern in his book Poetics. He talks about the formative parts of a tragedy relating to the 6 important elements. He starts describing plot and character and then deviates into many other detailing and topics. Later, he comes with the areas like peripeteia and anagnorisis. So, omitting a few of the formative parts in tragedy, now he goes on to the next chapter, that is chapter 16, which speaks about the different kinds of recognition. So recognition here is actually the discovery of truth, which is in fact connected with anagnorisis. So according to Aristotle, there are 6 types of recognitions coming within a play, which means anagnorisis in Greek drama could be employed in 6 different ways or in 6 different methods. So we are going to analyze it one by one. So the very first one is with the use of signs. It can be signs or it can be marks. Now this could be a kind of discovery which is coming through a particular sign or a birthmark. Now, Aristotle considers this as the most inartistic kind of recognition. This is very spontaneous and it comes all of a sudden, and because of that, Aristotle says it loses its credibility. So he has actually arranged the order from the least artistic to the most artistic. So signs or birthmarks, they are considered as the least artistic of all these different types of recognitions. Now, the best example would be the legendary story of Dushyanta and Shakuntala. If you know the story, you can see how they part with each other, and Dushyanta, as a result of the curse, forgets everything about Shakuntala. But later, it was with the aid of a ring that he comes back to his memory. So here, the ring serves as a sign or as a mark to carry the plot forward. The same thing happens in the work Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews. Now, it is at the last part of the story that the discovery comes that Joseph Andrews is actually the son of Mr. Wilson. Now, this is actually recognized because of a strawberry birthmark that he has got. So, this kind of a recognition which happens through a sign is considered as inartistic. The second one is by will, which means this recognition is deliberately employed by the writer, and therefore it is a forceful kind of thing which is again going to be inartistic. Now, Aristotle denies this kind of recognition because he says there is no logical flow in this. Now, the third one is something connected with memory. Now, the character's memory is suddenly awakened by something heard or something seen. Now, the best example here would be a Mammootty movie, which is actually a story based on an investigation. I don't remember the name of the movie exactly, but in this movie, they are investigating a case. Now, on one casual occasion, his subordinate tells him a very casual statement that we cannot even trust our own shadows. So, this is a very casual statement, but the word shadow clicks into the mind of the protagonist. Now, with the use of this shadow, the word, his memory is suddenly invoked and he conducts an investigation based on this. And there is a photograph which the opposite party has given as a proof. Now, using this photograph and using the aid of shadow, because when you take a photograph, the timing will showcase the size of the shadow. Sometimes the shadow is short, sometimes the shadow would be long, and based on this, you can recognize the timing. So, using this, he actually conducts an investigation and he proves the other party wrong. Similarly, there is another Dilip movie, which is a very famous movie, Misha Madhavan. If you look at the last part of the movie, you can see there is a conversation that happens between Dilip and the character of Mala Aravindan. And he discusses something in a very casual way about an unused well in that locality. And suddenly the memory of the hero is invoked and he goes in search of this unused well, and it is from this place that he retrieves the stolen idol. So this is how memory acts as a method of recognition. Now, moving on to the fourth one, this is a recognition which happens because of reason. Now, by process of reasoning, the recognition happens here. Now, here it is a logical kind of reasoning where one event gets linked to the another. So, in a way, the character will be using his own wisdom, his own reason for this kind of a recognition. So the best example would be the police officer in the movie Drishyam. Now this cannot be called as a real analysis of the movie, but I'm just telling you an example to make you understand how this kind of a logical reasoning can happen. But this cannot be a clear-cut example of anagnosis. Okay, so here if you look at the police officer, you can see he finds Mohanlal passing in a particular color car which is linked with the missing boy, and he tries to coordinate and connect things. So it is with logical reasoning that they finally realize the fact that he is the murderer. The next one is related with false clues. So false clues means the recognition happens from the false reasoning of the other party or the opposite party. So through these false reasoning, sometimes the truth is blown out. So this is another kind of recognition. Moving on to the last one, the recognition that comes out of pure action. Now, Aristotle considers this as the most beautiful and powerful kind of recognition. He says that this one actually grows from action. So nothing is forced and it is not deliberate. It comes in a very natural way. And since this is natural, it becomes more credible and believable. And moreover, it startles and it surprises the person who watches this show. So he says this is the most artistic kind of recognition. Moving on to the next chapters, chapter 17 and 18. Here, after listing the different ways of recognitions, now he moves on to the different kinds of tragedy. So in fact, he is giving a guideline for the new dramatist, like how to write a play or how to bring out your characters. So he says there are three things that a dramatist should think about when he is constructing a good play. So for the construction of a good play, these three elements are very important. Now the first one is visualizing the action. The second one, to work out the emotions. And the third one, to bring in a universal form. So the first one, to visualize the action, means the dramatist should actually visualize in mind how this will work when this drama is going to be staged. So in a way, this will help the dramatist to see or to look into the impossible and improbable kind of actions, so that in that case he can actually omit those kind of scenes and the play would look more believable for the audience. Now, the second one is working out the emotions. Now, this is very important because tragedy is all about catharsis or the purgation of emotions. So, if the audience should get into that purgation of emotion, the emotion of the characters should be worked out in an accurate way. Now, the third one is a universal form. Now, this universal form means certain structures and patterns which needs to be followed in the same way. For example, if you look at Greek theatre, chorus was a part of Greek theatre. So similarly, these kind of patterns which had been approved in all sense should be followed. At the same time, this drama should appeal to all kinds of individuals around the world. Every individual, despite caste, creed, or culture, should be able to identify with the characters. Now, this is what he means by a universal form. So, these are the three important elements that he talks about in relation to the construction of a good play. At the same time, he doesn't mention anything about poetic inspiration. But instead, he says the poet is a gifted man and the poet will have a touch of madness. So maybe this is an alternate statement that Aristotle makes instead of saying that a poet should have poetic inspiration. He also adds that the story can be from tradition or it can be the dramatist's own invention. But what matters would be the episodes, because episodes or the arrangement would be done by the maker. A failure in episoding can bring out a bad play. So this is very, very important. So the patterning of episodes is actually the arrangement of incidents, which is the structure of the entire play. Naming of the characters should also be taken into consideration because they should be having appropriate names. At the same time, there should be a kind of importance given to the significance and denouement. Now, denouement, as you know, is a falling action which comes almost closer to the last part of a tragedy. At the same time, he advises that plurality of action should be avoided, which means too many plots or too many storylines rather than the main one should be avoided. He also reminds us that a tragedy is not an epic because an epic means many stories can be included. Now, that is why we call Mahabharata and Ramayana as epics, because there are multiple characters, millions of characters, millions of storylines coming and going. But at the same time, there is a main character and a main action which is going on. But Aristotle says this is possible in an epic, but if you bring that into a tragedy, it will lose its strength and the tragedy would become a weak one. So, moving on, now he discusses the four kinds of tragedy. Now, the first one is a complex tragedy, then comes tragedy of suffering, then tragedy of character, and finally tragedy of spectacle. So these are the four kinds of tragedy that Aristotle comes up with. So now let's look at the definition of these types of tragedies. Now, complex tragedy means a tragedy which involves peripetia and anagnorisis. Now, if you remember, we studied the different types of plots. There are two kinds of plots, simple plot and complex plot. Simple plot is a one which goes in a linear way and there are no twists and turns, whereas a complex plot is a plot which includes peripetia and anagnorisis. So a complex tragedy is a tragedy which incorporates these two elements, peripetia and anagnorisis. So I'm not repeating those points because you know that peripetia is a sudden reversal of situation and anagnorisis is the final discovery. The next one is the tragedy of suffering. So, as the name suggests, this is all about painful events like death, murder, killings, wounds, etc. So, a lot of emotional package happens here. Then comes tragedy of character. Now, the speech of the character is the most important thing here. The thoughts, the speech, this is given importance, and therefore there would be a lot number of monologues given by the character. Now, the best example would be something similar to the play by Shakespeare, that is Hamlet. If you look at Hamlet, you can say there are lots of areas where Hamlet is talking to himself, and there are almost 7 soliloquies that are coming in this play. So, this is all about the speech and thought of the character. Now comes the tragedy of spectacle. Now, spectacle, as we know, is all about the visual display, what is showcased on the stage. So, this is in fact connected with the sensational effects produced on stage. So, this is in fact the visual extravaganza that you watch on the stage. So, it can relate to the stage settings, it can relate to the props used, it can relate to the costume of the characters, etc. So, this is more or less connected with stage rather than the plot or the story, though these things are important. Now, moving on to chapter 19, this is about thought in tragedy. Now, see, thought, character, plot, etc., these are considered as the formative elements of tragedy, but it is only in chapter 19 that Aristotle continues to define these terms. Now, thought is the thinking of characters expressed through words. So, what can be said and what should be said at each moment should be analyzed and should be considered. And do the lines make sense? This is another question that the dramatist should think when he is writing down the dialogues for the characters. The next one, that is in chapter 20, we come across diction. So, diction, as the name suggests, it means words, and that is why we use the term dictionary for the book where we check the meaning of the words. So, it comes from the very same term, diction in tragedy. It is the objectification of thought because what the character thinks, the audience cannot know. So, this thought has to come in the form of words. Only when it comes in the form of words, we can understand what the character thinks. So, effectively, this is an intellectual element. So, thought determines what is said, while diction is with how it is said. So, the power, the real power comes from this diction. Diction is also used to prove and refute the statements of characters. It is also used to express the emotions of characters. Apart from this, diction is also used to exaggerate and diminish things. So, for all these dimensions within the play, diction is used. So, let's just check one quotation by William Shakespeare. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets czar upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, this is actually a line taken from Shakespeare's Macbeth. Now, if you look at this line, you can see the power of the words. Now, more than that, as Aristotle has suggested, this has got a universal touch because this is about the life of human beings, the meaninglessness involved in human life. So, despite the cultural or racial or any kind of stratification, any human being can identify with this statement. So, diction is actually a very powerful element that comes in a play, specifically in a tragedy, because it is only through the diction that we can understand the thought of a character. Now, there are different elements related with this, which would be discussed in the coming chapter. So, with this, we come to the end of part 4. So, thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have any queries, suggestions, or if you need more assistance, please do not hesitate to connect with me in my email ID. So, thank you very much. Thank you.